For a while now, I wanted to make more videos that highlight my workflow inside Lightroom using the tools that I created and that I sell on my website in order to get cinematic looking photos. So let's jump into Lightroom and I'll walk you through from the first steps to the last steps on how I edit one of my portraits. This was shot in the middle of the day. Not ideal, but I like the contrast that I got here. And I had an external monitor on the camera, so I already know that I'm going to go for a very wide aspect ratio. It's something that I planned ahead, and that's the way I want to edit the photo. I'll start by cropping it at 65 by 24. This is the aspect ratio that it was shot at, and I'll also correct for tilting the horizon line. This is a decent crop, and I'll tweak it some more later on. First of all, I'm going to go for camera neutral as the profile so I can get more details out of the raw file. Now let's set a proper white balance. I'm boosting both vibrance and saturation to 100%, and now I'm trying to find a nice middle ground. I want the background to be a bit bluer than the subject in this case, so I'm dropping the white balance towards 5000, but not that low. Let's also adjust the tint because I don't want a lot of magenta in my shadows. I'm gonna double click on vibrance and saturation to reset them. And now let's get some more details out of the raw files. I'm gonna bring back the highlights, increase the shadows a bit. And now looking at my histogram up here, I want the blacks to be a bit darker and I want my whites to just touch the edges of the shot. These are pretty much basic edits that I do on most of my photos, but I try not to overdo the highlights and shadows because if you drag them past the 50 mark, you're going to get very HDR looking images. And I want my photos to look cinematic, not like they were shot on a phone. Next up in building my cinematic look, it's adding grain. I'm using my own recipe that adds different amount of grain in highlights, midtones and shadows. I'm also going to use my new tool called Filmic Tone Limiter. It's basically applying a mask over the entire image, like you see right now, that applies a curve on the luminance channel in order to create a bit of a toe and a bit of a shoulder in the highlights. It's preventing the image from clipping and at the same time it introduces a nice filmic contrast in the photo. And continuing the trend with the tools that I've created for myself to get more cinematic looking images, I'm also going to apply the curves that come from one of these classic film stones. I really like how this image looks with Kodak Ektar 25 in the push configuration. I'm going to base my image on this preset right here. This is applying color response curve in my curves panel. Now let's actually fine tune this specific image. I'm going to start by increasing the saturation a bit and also add a bit more contrast to the image. And I'm going to go back and tone down the Filmic Tone Limiter. I like how it looks now with crush shadows, but I really need some black in my photos. So I'm using the luminance curve right here, just going to drag the black point a bit down. And I'm going to be careful that I don't affect the entire image. I'm going to drop a few more points along the way and make sure they're on the middle zone. So what I'm doing is matching the input value with the output value. This way, me dragging the black point down is not going to affect the entire image. Another thing that I want to make sure looks good is the fact that when I zoom in, I don't want details to be bigger than my grain particles. And in this case, I'm also going to bring back a bit of the grain because it's a bit too rough for my liking. But I don't see a lot of details that are sticking out bigger than the grain particle. So I think we're fine in this category. Now, there's one more thing that I should have done at the beginning of the edit, but I'll do it now. I'll enable the camera profile and the chromatic aberration correction. This gives me an image that has little to no vignette, and I want some, so I'm gonna add back some of the vignetting, but we got rid of a lot of distortion. I like the look with the distortion corrected a lot more. Let's go back to the curves panel because I feel like the shadow on this part of the face is not dark enough. I'm going to delete this point and I'm going to add one more on the shadow side of the face to create a bit more contrast. And I'm going to fine tune it a bit. I don't want my face to look really dark, but I also want to have it in the shadow. So a nice middle ground is really good. The thing is that on my left side there was a lot of sand, and that sand is reflecting a really yellowy light onto my face right here. So I'm gonna want to compensate for that, and to do this I'm coming to the HSL panel and I'm bringing back the saturation in the orange just a tad in order to make my skin look more natural, and maybe also increase the brightness a bit, but these are really incremental adjustments. Next up, let's do a bit of masking. I want more saturation in the red of the shirt, and I'm going to use an object mask. And now let's hope that Lightroom actually guesses that I want my shirt to be the thing that it's going to be selected. Not bad. Let's do this again a few more times to get the entire shirt. And now, because I want to bring more reds to it, I'm going to increase the saturation a bit. And in the red channels, I'm going to boost the highlights a bit so the shirt looks a lot more red. But I'm gonna pay attention to the dark side because I don't want my shadows to also go into red, because the shirt was with red and black and I don't want it to be red and dark red. I'm starting to like how the image is coming together. There are a few more details that I want to take care of, like having this tiny gap in my hair cloned out. And one more trick to add the cinematic feeling to the image is adding a linear gradient from the top down and bumping up the exposure just a tiny bit. I don't know why, but this makes any outdoor image look a lot more cinematic, and it's going to brighten up the entire image. Let's see if adding a bit of color temperature to the upper part helps, but in this case I don't like it, so double click to reset. And a final step before going to Photoshop to add some black bars to this shot, I'm gonna try my film-like tone. It's basically a preset that adds reds into the shadows, green into the highlights, and a bit of yellowy orange tones into the midtones. This is a color grade that I really enjoy, and I think it looks really good in cinematic photos. But I'll also bring back the blending value a bit to make it look more natural. And this is the final image with me looking like a redneck on the edge of a lake. I hope at least some of you enjoyed this type of video that takes a lot less time to produce but is packed with useful information. And I'll see you in the next one.